I am so excited for today's episode. It is so good to be here with you. And we talk about how much I love to talk about travel, and I do love to talk about travel and all the fun itineraries and all the great things that I can do to help you plan your travel. But it's also super fun sometimes to get to talk about my own travel. And this has been a trip that I have been talking about for so long and just telling you it was coming and just all the anticipation and everything. And so I'm so excited to get to actually share with you all the fun things that happened. So, as you can tell, I am going to talk about our French river cruise. So, the title for today's episode is Stories on the Seine Connecting with Fascinating France. So, the Seine River is the river that we were sailing on in France. And it was amazing, amazing, incredible, all the things. But I thought rather than just tell you a blow by blow itinerary, then we saw this, and then we saw that, and then we did this, and then we did that, because I kind of did that already when I was talking about the trip and basically told you like what was going to happen and what our itinerary was going to be like. And so I'm not going through the itinerary step by step. Then we did this, then we saw this, but I am going to tell you about the stories that we found all along the way while we were sailing on the Seine River and all the fun things that we got to do. So, just a few little side notes as we jump in. Romina could not make it, and Romina is our French chef. And unfortunately, it didn't work out for her to be able to come, which we were very sad about. But we did have a small group of people, and we had an amazing time, a great time, still got to enjoy the French food and the pastries and everything. We just didn't get to do it with her expertise. But hopefully, another time in the future, we will get to make that happen. But so I'm just going to talk about our experience. My husband Sean and I sailed with our small group, and we sailed for 7 days. It was a 7-day cruise. And then we added on 3 extra nights in Paris at the end. So it was a perfect blend of relaxation and exploration and connecting. Oh my goodness. I'm all about connecting. And so that is why I decided to talk about the stories, because they connect us in a way that nothing else does. So we loved connecting with the French history and the culture and the people and the food and everything. The cruise line is AmaWaterways, and the amazing thing about AmaWaterways, well, there's lots of amazing things, but one thing that I really love is that every single excursion is already included. So with some other river cruise lines, some of them you have to pay for every excursion. Others, you get one included one that's just like the basic city tour, but if you want to do something a little more involved or different, then you have to pay for those. But with AmaWaterways, any and every excursion that you want to do is included. And you can even change your mind like the day before and say, no, I decided to go on this one instead. And you can change your mind and go on a different one. And so it's really, really great. We did hear some magical stories. We connected with each other and just met some amazing people. And it was wonderful. So let's jump in and I will tell you about some of the amazing stories. These pictures, just before I move on to the next slide, if you are watching the video, these pictures, no, this is not the river that we were sailing on. This is not a picture of the Seine River. This is just a beautiful little canal that was running through one of the little towns that we stopped at. So I thought it was such a fun picture. No, it's not the Seine River. Okay, the first place that we stopped, it was the town was called Le Havre, but from here we got to visit the beaches of Normandy. Oh my goodness, the stories of heroism and reunion. Our guide for the beaches of Normandy was wonderful Frederic, and Frederic told us some really great stories. Like all day long we got to hang out with her, but basically these were a couple of my very favorites. So one of the stories was her father, of course, was a Frenchman, and during World War II, he was captured. She didn't give any details or anything, but he was captured and he his imprisonment was that he had to live with a German family. So he was, living with a German family in Germany during World War II. And this German family, they weren't Nazis, they were just Germans, and they had to house this French man. They became such good friends, like amazingly good friends. So that years later, after the war, he took his family back to meet this wonderful German family. And they were so excited. They ran out and gave him a big hug and were so excited to get to meet his family. And I loved this story because so often we think of during World War II, that Germans were all Nazis, but they weren't. And sometimes they created some amazing bonds with the people that they met. My other favorite story that Frederique told us was about Billy D. Harris and Peggy Harris. So they got married, lived in America, and they got married, and then he enlisted as a fighter pilot, became a lieutenant, and they got married in 1943. He was shot down over a town called Levant in France, and it was as part of the Beaches of Normandy invasion. So he was shot down, and the people in the town buried him with full honors. He actually, the story is that with his fighter plane, he swerved around the town even once his plane was hit and he knew he was going down. He swerved around the town so that he would not land on any people and cause any damage to people in the town or himself. Anyway, so he was shot down, and the people in the town buried him, and they held annual ceremonies for him. But Peggy, back in the States, she lived in Texas, and she never knew this. She knew that he had been shot down, but she didn't know anything about where he was. And finally, in 2005, she hired a reporter, and this reporter did some research and found that this little town of Levant had been honoring him for years. The reason that she hadn't found him and hadn't known where he was buried is because his name was listed in the records as his middle initial was D and then his last name was Harris, but they had squished those together. And so he'd been DeHarris, DHARRIS. And so he had been listed completely differently in the records. And it was so amazing because Peggy was able to go back and see and meet these people in this little town that had been honoring her husband for years. Peggy never remarried. She stayed a widow for all of her days and just stayed, just felt like she was true to Billy. And she visited on a yearly basis from 2005 when she finally found out until she passed away in 2020. So, such an amazing story. I loved the stories of Normandy. The beaches of Normandy, if you ever have a chance to go, I would say go. It's such an amazing, wonderful, solemn, reverent kind of place to visit there. And just all of the stories of the history, it just really comes to life, and it's just really, really amazing. Just beautiful. So there are American beaches, there are British beaches, and there's a Canadian beach, and just incredible all along this stretch of coastline in France, which really helped win the war. It was the start of winning the war for the Allies. So anyway, it was amazing to be there at the Normandy beaches. I absolutely loved it. The next little town that we were able to visit was called Bayeux. And Bayeux is famous for William the Conqueror and the tapestry that they have there. Now, they have this huge, huge, long tapestry. It is 230 feet long. You would not believe how long that is. It's embroidered, so it has been stitched, hand stitched. It is left over from the 11th century. Like, that is so long ago. And it is still, you can still see the colors. You can still see this embroidery. It is not falling apart. And it is the story of William the Conqueror's victory in the Battle of Hastings in 1066. Now, these pictures that I have are not pictures of the actual tapestry. They're pictures of replicas. because you're not allowed to really take pictures of the tapestry. Well, I could have without a flash, but they wouldn't have turned out very good. So these are replicas that I'm showing in the pictures of little sections of the tapestry. But this tapestry tells the entire story. And our guide was Pascaline, and she told us this whole story. It's like a soap opera. It's amazing that William was the Duke of Normandy first, and then he actually also became the King of England at the same time because of this victory in this battle. And so he was the King of England and the Duke of Normandy at this exact same time. And the tapestry is just this incredible artistic masterpiece. Like, I would not have thought that I would have been as amazed at an old tapestry as I was. And it's really great to, as you go through and get to see the tapestry, they have a little audio story that you get to listen to, and it explains the whole story. Also, we had kind of heard it in a nutshell from Pascaline before we started listening to it on the audio. And it's amazing. It's such drama and just incredibly done. It's just incredible to think of how old this tapestry is. So one fun fact is every ruler in England since then has been of Norman descent. So they have a little French side to them, a little smidgen of France in them because of William the Conqueror. In the morning, we saw Bayeux, and in the afternoon, we went to a little town called Caen. And Caen was really great too. I don't have any specific stories from here, but we had some amazing lunch, some delicious crepes. Delicious. They were so good. And we saw this beautiful cathedral, and this cathedral is actually where the Lionheart, Richard the Lionheart, was buried. And so that's really cool to get to see this cathedral. So that was fun. The following day, we were at a town called Rouen. And Rouen is the birthplace and the home and the eventual place where Joan of Arc lived and where she was eventually burned at the stake. So this town has a whole little section. It's got a whole old section that is kind of dedicated to her. And you can see they've got this huge cross in a square, which represents where she was burned at the stake. Anyway, so in addition to kind of seeing all of this history where Joan of Arc lived and died and kind of her history, we took a Taste of Normandy excursion in this place. And what are the tastes of Normandy? Well, they are cheese and chocolate, for sure. So the history of cheese, the early Greeks and Romans who lived in the area of France, they initially were the ones that started making cheese, but then cheese was kind of perfected and really continued by the French monks in medieval times. So then by the early 1700s, there were already hundreds of cheeses in France. And each cheese reflects like the countryside and the environment and the little area that it comes from. And now, today, there are over 1,600 types of cheeses in France. So it's amazing. We got to taste some of them along with like a charcuterie board, some breads and some meats and some little crackers. And anyway, it was delightful. Then chocolate. So chocolate, I know a lot of people think that France maybe was one of the first places that chocolate came from, but that is not true. In the 1600s, French royalty was introduced to it from Spain. And at first, they just drank it. They just made it into like a hot chocolate and they drank it. So amazing, so wonderful. But then it evolved, and then even 200 years later, they had refined it into an art form. And so now chocolate is such a huge art form in France. The French invented pralines, ganache, chocolate truffles, all these amazing chocolate varieties. And the place where we got to go for our Taste of Normandy tour was a little place called L'Atelier du Chocolat. And we got to see a demo and have some samples, of course, and it was so great. So the Taste of Normandy, highly recommend. Some other things that we saw in Rouen Rouen, there's a great little, I did not go inside, but I was able to see from the outside. There's a great little place where Julia Child first started and where she got the inspiration for her recipes and for her culinary expertise. I told you this is also where Richard the Lionheart is. He's the one that is in the story of Robin Hood. So he is supposed to have been buried in this cathedral. And then also in Rouen, they have an astronomical clock, and it's still going. And it's really beautiful and amazing as well. So Rouen was pretty cool. The next day, we docked in a town called Vernon. And Vernon, if you have never heard of Vernon, you may have heard of Claude Monet. Monet was the father of Impressionist painting, and he came from this area. His home and his gardens are in a little place called Giverny. So amazing, so beautiful. Could not, my husband and I took this picturesque bike tour of the village of Vernon and Giverny, just this exact area where Claude Monet lived and painted. So there's these ponds, there's the bridges that you see, the Japanese bridges that you see in so many of his paintings. The gardens are very extensive. This is a picture of some bamboo. He actually did import a lot of tropical types of plants into this area, and he had water nearby so that it would have plenty of moisture. So beautiful. Of course, the lily pads are floating in the ponds, and just it was gorgeous. Even though we were there in the fall and it wasn't in full bloom like it might have been in the summer, there were still so many things that were blooming and beautiful. So Monet moved here in 1883, and he totally just transformed the gardens into this incredible masterpiece. I feel like he was such an artist, not only on canvas, but also his landscaping, his gardening he was such an artist in putting all of that together. A few more pictures of Monet's home. You get to go on a tour when you come to the gardens. You also get to tour the home, and it's a beautiful home. They've really kept it in wonderful upkeep, and they've really left it or restored it to be how it was or how it would have been when Monet lived here. So it's really fun to walk through and see his home. It's beautiful. The following day, we were in this little beautiful countryside town called Mantes-la-Jolie. And in the morning, we got to visit an apple orchard. So Emmanuel Highest started this apple orchard. He inherited it from his grandfather, and his daughter Constance is also helping him. And so Emmanuel and Constance are the two owners of this apple farm, and it is amazing. They have 8 varieties of apples. The reason that they have 8 varieties is for a few reasons. One is if there is a late frost, a late freeze, then the late frost will not kill all of the apples so that they will still have a good production. Another reason that they have so many varieties is there are different types of trees, and they specifically have included some with different lifespans. So there are some that have, once you plant a new tree, there is a 5-year wait until they're really ready to produce. Others, there is a 10-year wait until they are ready to produce. Now with the 5-year apple trees, they have to be pulled up and replanted every 30 years. With the 10-year wait ones, they only have to be pulled up and replanted every 100 years. And so you can see why there would be such value in having all these different types of apple trees so that you wouldn't have to redo everything all at the same time. And of course, it contributes to the flavor of the juice to have these different varieties of apples. Now, at this farm, they produce apple juice, which is so amazing. It's wonderful. They also produce apple cider. Now, we in the US call apple cider like it's just a form of apple juice, but their apple cider has a 5% alcohol content. And then they produce the hard stuff, which is called pomados, and that one is more like an 80 proof. So that one is very strong. So it was really great to get to visit this apple orchard and find out about kind of the grassroots efforts and how it's just been in their families for hundreds of years, and they are just continuing on. In the afternoon, we got to visit a bee farm. And this was super great as well. It's still in the same general area, but it's, a whole different production. And this is Xavier and Charlotte. They are husband and wife, and it is their bee farm. It was just a regular working vegetable farm. And then about 5 years ago, Xavier got really interested in bees. And so he got a couple of hives, and then that has expanded. And so now they have more than 400 beehives. And the honey is one of their top producing staple of their farm now. So the bees that they have descended from hardy English stock. They got some from a specific area of England that has the same weather that they have and the same climate that they have here in France. And they are really well known for the quality of their bees and their queen bees. And they have kind of a little side business, I guess, where they export or they send queen bees to other beekeepers who want to, I guess, start their own hives or who would like to develop a hardy and resilient type of bee production like these guys have. So it was really cool. We got to see a demo of the bee trays that are inside the hive. And he showed us, since of course it's fall, this is not bee production time of year. The honey production time of year is spring and summer. Mostly it's summer, I would say. And so in the fall, mostly they are just kind of hunkering down, and they do keep honey in the chamber as part of the beehive for the bees to eat through the winter, because that sustains the bees. The bees' job during the winter is just to keep the queen bee warm, and they don't really produce much honey, but they're just kind of it's not hibernation because they're still alive, but it is a much more of a low-key type of existence throughout the winter. So Charlotte, Xavier's wife, she runs the shop and the educational portion of the business because she found out that she is allergic to bees and should not get any bee stings, or she will be in danger of dying because she has such a bad allergy to bees. So they didn't know this until they were on their way to producing honey at this farm. And now it's fine because she just has a lot of busy jobs that she takes care of on her own, but she doesn't do much to handle the bees. So it was really fun to go to the bee farm and get to find out their story as well. Then the second to last, I guess nearly last day of the river cruise, we got to Paris. And that afternoon, we were docked in Paris, but we weren't off of the ship. We didn't get off the ship until the following morning. And so that final afternoon, we got to choose one last excursion to do from the river cruise ship. And we chose to do a bike tour. Now, this bike tour was so great. It was so fun. We got to bike around and see all of the highlights of Paris. And when do you ever get to do that by bike? It was so amazing. And we would stop at all of these different sites, and Helene, our guide, would tell us these great stories about everything. So I'll tell you a couple of my favorites. One was the Eiffel Tower story. It was built for the 1889 World's Fair, and they were only going to keep it for 20 years originally. But then they kept it because it stayed standing, and so then they kept it. And 100 years later, they were still kind of debating whether they were going to keep it as a permanent structure or if they were going to take it down. But finally, this is 100 years later, it was the bicentennial of the French Revolution, which happened in the late 1700s. And at that point, they decided, yep, we think we'll keep it as a permanent forever. So I was amazed to find out that they didn't completely decide to keep the Eiffel Tower around permanently until the 1980s. That just blows my mind. Okay. Another story that she told us is about the debate regarding the Olympic rings. Now, if you remember, during the Paris Olympics, there were Olympic rings on the Eiffel Tower. And so there has been such a debate as people talk about whether there should be permanent Olympic rings on the Eiffel Tower. And they have really gone back and forth, yes, no, whether there will be or not. And finally, the mayor of Paris has passed, I guess, a law, or I don't know what it is, but she has decided that there will be permanent rings displayed on the Eiffel Tower. Now, they are not there right now because we are just in the temporary in-between stage where they have removed the ones that were there for the Olympics, but they haven't got the permanent ones back up yet. So there will be permanent ones that will be on the Eiffel Tower. So that was kind of a cool story. And another story that I loved is about the Luxor obelisk. Now, the obelisk, there is a real obelisk from Egypt that it reminds me of the Washington Monument, but it's gray and it's got Egyptian hieroglyphics on it. And it stands at the Place de la Concorde, which is pretty close to the Eiffel Tower and the Louvre, both. This Luxor obelisk was a gift to France from Egypt in 1830. That was back in the time of Napoleon. One of the historians that lived in Napoleon's time, he figured out how to decipher the hieroglyphics. And so he really helped the Egyptians to decipher a lot of the pictographs, the hieroglyphics that were on their tombs and monuments and things back in 1830. And so as a gift, they gifted France with one of these obelisks. Now, this is the Luxor obelisk, and they always come in pairs. In Egypt, they always produce the obelisks in pairs. And so the other one, its twin, is still at the Luxor Temple in Egypt. And this one is here in Paris. So I thought that was a really cool story as well. Okay, so then we disembarked off of the ship our last morning. It was a Saturday morning. And then after that, we spent 3 more days in Paris. And we got so good at the metro. We were like so proud of ourselves at the metro and the train riding. And because that can be a challenge sometimes when you're in a different city, especially a foreign city, but we got to, so we're old pros at it now. We totally know how to do it. But we had lots of adventures, heard lots of stories, and had some amazing food. So some of the things we did, just in a nutshell, we visited the Palace of Versailles, which is so mind-blowing. It is incredible. We also visited the temple for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, which is close to Versailles. We took a walking/metro tour of the 30 best sites in Paris, and that was really, really fun. It actually ended up being, it wasn't supposed to be, we didn't book it as a private tour, but it ended up being a private tour, and it was so great. We climbed the Eiffel Tower. We visited the Louvre with a guide, because they say with the Louvre, if you stood in front of each of the works at the Louvre for only 1 minute, it would take you a full 3 days to get through everything. So we visited the Louvre with a guide so that we could see some of the highlights and not miss some of the things that we really wanted to see. So that was a good way to see the Louvre. It was also a nice skip the line option, I have to say. We took a food tour, which was super fun. And these were just wonderful, amazing ways to connect with Paris. We loved the little shops and restaurants, cafes, and patisseries, boulangeries. We loved it. We loved the French people. They were so amazing. They were so wonderful. And hearing the stories and talking to the people and just getting a little slice of France and Paris through just being able to stay there for a few days, that was so great. It was really awesome. So I just included a few other pictures. You can see the Mona Lisa. That was my picture of the Mona Lisa from the Louvre. So that really is what she looks like. You can see a picture of the Seine River as we are in Paris. It's so beautiful. And these other pictures are guide at the Eiffel Tower. When we climbed the Eiffel Tower, she showed us right from the second story, the second floor of the Eiffel Tower, you could see across this whole area. And she had a picture on her phone of what it looked like during the Paris Olympics. And so it was really fun. I took a picture of her phone, what it looked like during the Olympics, and this how they had the stadium set up and everything versus what it looks like now. And so it was really cool to see the before and after, or the during the Olympics and after the Olympics. It was a really, really great time to visit Paris because everything had been cleaned up and spiffed up and just made so amazing for the Olympics. And so it was so great to get to visit the same year, but just a little bit after the Olympics. So we didn't have to deal with the crowds and we didn't have to deal with the heat, but we still had all of these beautiful, cleaned up, amazing sights and places that we got to see. So, as the French say, voila! We really loved the stories, the culture, the food. Oh my heavens. Some of the best food I have ever had in my entire life. I kid you not. So amazing. Like I said, the wonderful little shops and restaurants. We loved the cathedrals. We loved the cobblestone streets, the beautiful countryside. It was magical. It was so great. Let me know if you would like to plan an adventure. It does not have to be this same one, this same type, but if you want to plan an adventure where the stories there can become part of your life, because that's how I feel that this French adventure was for us. It was so amazing, so wonderful, and it was so great to get to be part of France and her stories. So excited that I got to share this with you and that we got to talk about it today. So we will check with you in a couple of weeks and talk to you later. If you've enjoyed this podcast, I would invite you to like, share, or leave a review. Let's help grow our wellness travel community.